Hey, everybody.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Hi, I hope you're having a good day. So I am Christine Weiser. I'm the Executive Director of Philadelphia Stories. For those I haven't met yet, so nice to see some new names and faces. Welcome. Probably know all the housekeeping for the sessions, but basically, as our panelists are presenting, if you could just keep your microphone muted. Try and keep background distractions to a minimum. We find the best experience is the speaker view, which is scrolling up to the top right there with the squares. So the gallery view has that everybody's in it, and the speaker view, then you can focus on the presenters a little bit better. And then I think you probably all have the landing page link where all the links to all the sessions for the day are, and I'll put that into chat in 1 second. But I would like to hand it off now to our moderator, Maddy LeMaire. If you want to, Maddy, you want to take her away?
Hey, yeah. My name is Maddy LeMaire. I won't give too much background on me because we're not here for me. So I'm moderating the YA and children's panel. I have a master's in publishing and an MFA in creative writing, and I live in Hawaii. I tried to find a better Hawaiian aesthetic, but the sun did not want to cooperate. So you get this lovely grass backyard that I'm sure all of you have anyways. So if the panelists would like to introduce themselves, we have 4, in whichever order you guys would like to go. And then we could jump right into some questions that I've got, and then we'll take a bit at the end to answer any questions that the audience has.
I'll go first. I'm Victoria Strauss. I write for both adults and teens. My most recent novels are a pair of historicals for teens called Passion Blue and Color Song. I'm also the co-founder of Writer Beware, which is a publishing industry watchdog group sponsored by the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America. So I'm looking forward to answering some questions about writing scams and things to watch out for.
I can go. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. Hi, I'm Cheng. I write middle grade fiction. I'm the author of See You in the Cosmos, which came out a few years ago. Before that, I actually used to work in advertising and tech. And while I was doing that, I self-published and self-funded through Kickstarter an adult novel. But now my kids' novel came out through Penguin Random House. And I'm going to continue writing for kids. I'm working on a new novel that's on deadline as we speak. So nice to meet all y'all. Yep.
And I can go next. I'm Rajani LaRocca. I'm a doctor in the Boston area and also an author of books for kids. So Midsummer's Mayhem is my first novel. It came out in 2019. It's middle grade. And I have a forthcoming middle grade novel called Red, White, and Whole, which will be coming in February of 21. And my first picture book, 7 Golden Rings, is coming out in a couple of weeks. So I came to writing kind of later in my life, but I love doing it and I love writing for kids.
Then
Hi, I'm Margo Rabb, and I also write for young adults. I am about to publish a new novel called Lucy Clark Will Not Apologize with HarperCollins in May. It's actually my 7th young adult, my 3rd with HarperCollins. And I also write short stories, essays, journalism, and book reviews for the New York Times, Slate, Salon, Marie Claire, and other publications. And I'm happy to talk about submitting work, any of that. And it's so nice to see you all. I wish we could be in Hawaii. It looks so beautiful. Especially with a doctor. It seems like I wish we could all just move over there, or maybe, maybe even farther to New Zealand.
I'd love to be in New Zealand right now. So I did give you guys some of the questions I was wondering, and this one wasn't on there, and it only speaks to some of you, but I'm actually kind of wondering it. So a couple of you have written outside of YA and children's. I did know that I saw Jack had published his adult novel. So I don't know, it sounds like a lot of you who have written outside of it kind of are now like, no, I think I want to stay in YA. So why is that? What kind of attracts you to this YA or children's genre over others?
Well, I've gone back and forth. My first novel was a young adult because I was a young adult when I wrote it, mostly. And I did 2 more young adults, and then I did duology for adults, and then 2 more adult novels, and then back to YA for my most recent 2. So, you know, it's the approach, my approach isn't that different between adult and young adult. For me, it's mostly the age of the protagonist and the struggles that they face, which are different for younger people and for adults. And also my adult novels are longer, but I love writing for both markets, and I'm sure I will continue to switch back and forth, you know, as the ideas take me. I think the next thing I write will probably be for adults, but I know I will be going back to YA just because it's such an exciting field. There's so much creativity and there's such a passionate audience for it.
So as an adult, I also read books for adults, but when it comes to writing, I feel like middle grade is my sweet spot because the books that influenced me the most in my life were the ones that I read between the ages of 8 and 13. And I feel like that's the kind of book that I want to write for young readers. The other thing is that it's possible that I'm kind of stuck at the mental age of 12, like who can tell? And then in terms of picture books, I never intended to write picture books, but then I kind of like started reading them as a writer as opposed to as a parent, where like basically you were like, I just need to get this done so you will go to sleep. And I just fell in love with the magic of telling a story with very, very few words, and of course being in equal partnership with an incredible illustrator.
I love that. Oh, sorry, you could
go ahead, Margo.
Sure. Okay, I was going to say I agree, and I write for adults too, but I have to say, especially now when the world is completely bananas, I'm finding reading everything with my kids, but even myself, from picture book, middle grade through young adult, is I think my favorite time of the entire day is when I can be in a children's book, and I'm treasuring them now more than ever. I think it's just the most beautiful genre. And I keep saying to my own kids, my kids are 10 and 13, and I keep saying, like, grown-ups have really screwed this world up. So, what do you guys think? I honestly, like, trust children now more than grown-ups. So I think the literature for children also is just the most honest and beautiful literature that we have right now.
I totally agree, Margo. I think for me, it was really just so special getting to actually like interact with kids and connect with readers. And I think especially with children's literature, there's just such a huge community around it because it's not the students, it's also their parents, it's teachers, librarians, booksellers. And that's something that, I think it's like unique to children's publishing, the way that it touches so many different worlds. Also, just going off of what Rajani was saying, there's something really interesting to me about the challenge of writing middle grade because, at that age, your reader is fully expected to be able to, have a grasp of the language, that they can understand what's going on the page. But then there are certain subjects that might be too overwhelming, or that you might have to be really, really sensitive to. And to me, that's a challenge as a writer, to try to figure out ways to actually like distill and, simplify and move into the background these things I'm trying to address, without it being, you know, too overwhelming for the kids. And so I find that just really creative, really refreshing to have that challenge.
Yeah, that's really cool. Sorry if my wind chimes are a bit loud. So actually, I think I know you guys' answer to this, and it's going to kind of dive into this topic on diversity that I want to talk about. So I want to start with the question of what genre you think diverse books would be best, and not solely, but just like which genre needs to be flooded with them as far as age range goes. Like where would it be most helpful? And why? Like, why would you pick children's or why and YA over adult, right?
So is it a cop-out to just say all of them? Like, honestly,
No,
I mean,
definitely not.
I really do think that literature should reflect the world that we live in, and it should also reflect the world that we want to create. And that is a diverse world, right? Like, look around you. You know, and I think that what's interesting to me is that, you know, when I grew up in this country, I never read a single book with anybody that looked like me or came from my background. And you know what? I still loved books. Like, I empathized with all those characters. I loved all those characters and felt like I was them. And so I think it's underestimating young readers to say that they only want to read books about people who look exactly like them or who come from their same circumstance. And it's, you know, and of course diversity goes way beyond what people look like or what their, you know, ethnic or racial background is. And we're talking about, you know, sexual orientation, we're talking about neurodiversity. There's all kinds of things and all kinds of stories, like an infinite number of stories. So I think that, you know, the more varied, the better in all genres.
I agree.
Yeah, I like that. That's a great answer. Definitely not a cop-out. That's the answer that publishing needs to hear. And in vain with that, so, you know, recently publishing's really been under fire for just how not diverse they are in every aspect, from the working field to what they produce. So I kind of was wondering, you know, from recent years and how diversity has kind of, you know, really been called out in publishing, has it affected what you write, or perhaps like the type of topics that you dive into, as far as, you know, writing with diversity, or you know, as writers who come from not as diverse of a background, adding that into your stories? Like, how has that affected you as a writer, with publishing kind of being called out for it? And, you know, has it allowed you to do deeper topics that you would have avoided possibly before?
I think it's a complicated situation for me personally, just because my last novel, for middle grade, was a novel that had a main character who was half Filipino, half Caucasian, and I am neither of those things. I'm Chinese American, and I think, like, one thing I do think that the publishing world needs more of is stories that have diverse characters that aren't necessarily about their race or the thing that makes them marginalized, right? We need examples of joy and examples of kids just like living their lives. And until we can get to that point where, you know, you can submit a manuscript to a publisher that has a diverse character, that where the story isn't about, you know, isn't about their conflict that they're going through around their own, you know, race or whatever, and have editors and publishers not say to you that, oh, I think it seems like this person is different, so this thing that makes them different should be a part of the story. I think until we get to that point, we won't, you know, we won't have achieved like real diversity. And I think I was going to say something else, but I completely lost my train of thought. So
Happens to me all the time. Totally fine.
Well, Jack, let me just jump off on that. So my debut novel, Midsummer's Mayhem, the main character has one Indian parent and one Caucasian parent, and her, you know, background is not a problem. It's a Midsummer Night's Dream meets Cupcake Wars, basically. So, you know, there's kind of Indian food in the stuff that she bakes, but it's not an issue or a problem. And you know, it's really interesting because the story is just full of like baking and happiness, and you know, obviously she has problems that she needs to solve, but it has nothing to do with her background. And I do think, you know, we did get some, you know, some publishers who were like, oh, but like, wouldn't it be great if we knew more about this? And like, isn't that like, wouldn't that be great if that was and I was like, no, that is like not the point. Like, she has her own story. She happens to be, you know, have this kind of background, and like, that has to be okay.
And yeah, and I think that to sort of build onto that, I think like our own diversity and our own backgrounds, they sort of inflect the way that we see the world. They sort of italicize, you know, everything we do. And it's those kinds of things that, even if we're not writing about, you know, racism, right, they make their way, like our background and our perspectives, our individual perspectives and our individual histories make their ways into our stories. It doesn't matter, you know, who you are as a writer, you know, your experiences shape the work. And I also remembered the other thing I was gonna say, and that's that I think what's happening in publishing is reflective of what's happening in the culture. And I think this is a time in our culture where I know for me personally, I've sort of turned inward to do more self-examination and to kind of look at my own experience as a Chinese American. So the novel that I'm working on right now, it kind of started with the story that was about this, you know, Chinese American kid growing up in Detroit, where I live, where there aren't that many like East Asian people living in the city of Detroit. Most of the East Asian community is in the suburbs. And I think like originally that book started out with like, you know, what is it like as a Chinese American kid, possibly with like a third perspective on this conversation that's typically about Black and white. But as a result of working on that book and doing research on that book and learning more, I realized that I hadn't yet processed a lot of my Chinese experience. And so the book ended up becoming much more about like my own, you know, trying to navigate this like split Chinese American identity. So I think for me, yeah, it's just sort of come back inward, and I've definitely had to dig deeper into my own background and understand my own experiences.
I think that has affected a lot of writers, you know, when they start writing. Because even I, you know, I grew up reading, same as what Rajani said, like all of the characters were, I mean, they were like me though, they were white, and but I mean, I grew up, where was I going with this? Oh no, Jack, what did you do? Let's see. Oh, okay. So yeah, when I started writing, you know, you don't think about it when you read about how, because you just kind of connect with the characters sometimes. I mean, sometimes it's very obvious, but you just kind of connect with the characters. And I think that just because we grew up with it being a norm of it just kind of going over our heads, that there weren't different types of diversities as far as anything goes, as far as ethnic, neurodiversity, or, you know, orientation wise, we just didn't think about it. But as I started writing, it became something that I had to consciously be like, why am I not putting this in my novel? You know, I have a third of my friends who, you know, whose sexual orientation is not cis hetero. So like, why am I not representing this? Like, you know, because you just don't think about it. And this would be interesting from your perspective, Jack, because one of my questions was, you know, how can non-marginalized authors include diversity without crossing lines? And that's not exactly what I want to ask, because you've said, you know, you definitely are a marginalized author, but even you kind of went, what some people would say, like, oh, you know, you wrote about a different experience that wasn't your own. Like, how did you not blur those lines?
Yeah, so I see that we actually have a question in chat that relates to this. It's from Catherine, who says that they have a grandmother character in the chapter book who's Native, and they're not Native. So would that be a problem with publishers? I think, you know, I think you have to kind of like look at why you feel the need to include characters or write main characters that are not, you know, of that background, of the same background as you. But I think there's also this aspect to it that's about like doing the work and actually doing the research. I for one feel that, you should go ahead and write what you want to write and write the characters that you want to write. But at the same time, writing is different from publishing, right? Writing is sort of you getting to kind of like work out and make mistakes and do a lot of learning. And so I think you have to, to write characters that are not of your own background or experience, just as if, you were writing like, about a rock climber, a character who's a rock climber, and you're not a rock climber. You have to go and actually do the research, right? You have to talk to people who are rock climbers. You have to, interview people. You have to understand the kinds of tropes that exist and are harmful to those communities. And I think it's really just about like doing all the work and making sure that you align yourself with publishers and editors and agents who are also, interested in not only telling these stories, but I think telling them in ways that aren't hurtful and don't cause harm to the communities. Because I for one do feel that, having Asian characters represented by white authors in their stories is really, really important. And I would hate for a white author to kind of shy away from including an Asian character just because they feel like, oh, that's outside of my experience. But at the same time, yeah, if you're going to include those characters, you have to absolutely do the work.
Yeah, if anyone else has anything to piggyback off. If not, I do have a somewhat related topic. So for those of you who have been writing for a while, and the fact that this is it's been called out kind of recently, but I mean, it's been called out on and off throughout years. Have you found that from when you started, and just how Jack said, writing is kind of different than publishing. Not everything we write does get published. So from the time you started writing to now, have you found that your stories are more diverse?
Yes, for me, I write fantasy, which is embracing diversity right now, but, for a long time was extremely white, and I've been writing over many years. My first novel was published in the 1980s. And looking back over some of my past work, I'm embarrassed at kind of the intrinsic assumptions that I made that all my characters should be white. I mean, it's fantasy. It's not, I wasn't trying to represent reality or write about real people and places, but still. So I think, the increasing focus on diversity in writing and publishing has definitely led me to question my own kind of intrinsic assumptions and biases, and to make my writing more diverse, make my characters more diverse. Sometimes I also write historical fiction, and sometimes it's not possible to write about diversity in the contemporary way because, for instance, my last two novels are set in Renaissance Italy, where realistically there are, all the characters are going to be white pretty much. But you can represent diversity in other ways. The story takes place in a convent, and a big theme of the story is kind of the oppression of women and the alternative ways in which women in that period could find freedom to express themselves and their creativity. So it was important to me in writing those novels to explore those avenues and just not make assumptions the way that I did when I first started writing.
Yeah, okay. So I guess you probably have been writing the longest, Victoria. That was not
embarrassingly so.
No, but like even from when, I said when I started reading, and I really didn't start reading for fun until I was in high school. Most of the stuff that I read, there was like every once in a while there was a book about diverse characters. And again, as you know, many of you have pointed out, diversity comes in so many different forms. You know, there's ethnicity, there's orientation, there's neurodiversity, there's so many different types of diversity. So one of my questions is, what are the type of, what is a underrepresented diversity that you'd love to see more of, and who do you think needs to accept these books the most to make it the norm? Does it need to be publishers who are publishing them? Does it need to be agents who are like, no, I'm going to just take on diverse characters now? Does it need to be readers who are like, I'm going to buy diverse books, in your opinion?
I think publishers need to really accept and embrace this, because in publishing there are trends and fads. And, you know, right now it's all about diversity. But publishers need to not, you know, do as they do with other trends and focuses and sort of let this one go and move on to the next.
Yeah, I think one of the problems too is that publishing does see diversity as a trend, and it's not a trend, and it's never been a trend for the world to be diverse. It's always been diverse for, you know, for thousands of years. It's been diverse. So yeah.
I think when we talk about these issues, like, it's deeply, deeply systemic and needs to change in every aspect of society. I mean, I'm just looking at my own, what my children learn in school. You know, it's Fannie Lou Hamer, the famous civil rights activist, birthday this week. And, you know, my kids are not really taught about her in school. Like, the civil rights history needs to be embedded in every curriculum from kindergarten up at preschool. You know, I mean, these issues are so deeply systemic that I think it has to change in every aspect of society. And it's, you know, we have so far to go. So I think it's the responsibility of every human being to look at it in our own lives, but systemically, how does it play out in our schools? How does it play out in our jobs, in the books we purchase, in the way we parent? Like, just really to question and, you know, take responsibility for making changes.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Margo. I taught school last year for elementary kids. I did GT, which was gifted and talented, and I got to know a lot of the teachers. And I found out that not only were the teachers not teaching certain parts of history, like, you know, the 3/4 compromise rule or the Trail of Tears, they didn't even know what those were. I grew up in a different type of environment just because I was military, so we moved every 2 years, so I went to a bunch of different schools, so I knew these things, and I studied anthropology and history, and I was really just flummoxed that not only were they not teaching kids about these things, but the teachers themselves weren't even, they were like, oh, is that, but they weren't sure. And it's a societal thing. And I think the fact that, honestly, you know, publishing is so centraled around the US and the market, you know, it needs to start with every aspect of society, but particularly within, you know, the United States. I mean, in my opinion, but
I will also say that kids are open to reading all kinds of books, as long as the gatekeepers don't prevent them from doing so. So boys will read books about girls, you know, white people will read about people who are not white, you know, it's neurotypical people will read about neurodiverse people. As long as the books are there and available for the kids to read, they're not the ones that are going to say no.
Definitely. That's a great.
Yeah, and to add on to that, I think you are, I think what Margo was saying, that a lot of the issues are systemic. If you look at the publishing industry right now, what I'm seeing is that a lot of the, you know, people who work in publishing are still mostly white. But if you look at the you know, the people who are new to publishing and working as assistants, editorial, publicist assistants, they're often people of color. And they're starting to work their way up, you know, that ladder. And there'll be, you know, there'll be more of those people in positions where they can actually make decisions. And I think it's the job of the publishing industry and all, you know, all the gatekeepers to figure out ways to like identify their own prejudices and the ways that they kind of subconsciously might stand in the way of a more system-wide, a quicker system-wide flourishing of that diversity. So I'm all for, like, publishing companies having all their employees do anti-racism training, for instance. I think that's a good example of what a big company in this industry can do to kind of accelerate that process.
Oh, that's a great point. I love that you brought that up because, I was thinking, it's a really interesting time because we see, just like you said, we kind of see that the gatekeepers are still in charge, but we also see that the people who are rising up are much more diverse. But it's kind of like we're in this period where we just have to sit and wait. And there's not much that we can do. And, that's a really great suggestion just for a way that a publishing house can include and start to hasten diversity just with simple training that you would think that, they go through anyways.
I think as readers, we can all educate ourselves by just, looking at what books you're reading. Are you reading as many diverse authors as possible and not checking off boxes? I don't think anything is no identity is a monolith, like reading as diversely as possible. And historically, like if there are gaps in your education that you don't know about historically from other cultures or neurodiversity, filling in those gaps with yourself and then having those open conversations, even within your own community and friendships, I think, that gives me a lot of hope. But I do think like literally every human being right now needs to take stock of who we are and like really do some really serious examination of ways we can really start changing the world.
Definitely. I think that's a great point. Thank you. I want to switch over really quickly to a couple of questions about Victoria's Writers Beware. If you guys are good, if there's anything you'd like to bring up, though, definitely shout it out at me. You guys good? All right, and then we'll have some time for the audience to answer some or ask some questions. Victoria, as far as Writers Beware, so Writers Beware is this group that you've co-founded that helps to warn authors about scams and I cannot tell you how many times I've befriended people, particularly on social media and furthermore on Twitter, who I'm like, hey, I know that you're really excited. You've got this great offer. Really look into who it is, who you're publishing with, ask their clients, see if they're around. Oh, they're new. There's no one to talk to. Maybe so along that vein, when did you realize that people needed these type of warnings, that particularly authors to work with, to like warn them away from shady agents or editors or houses? When did you find that was actually like a really big concern?
Well, I'm embarrassed to say more than 20 years ago. Writer Beware was founded by me and Ann Crispin in 1998. And when I first went online, I had no idea, there was this whole universe of fraudulent vanity publishers and fee-charging agents who were ripping off writers. And as I began joining writers groups, I saw, people telling their stories of these experiences. And at the same time, the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America was looking for a volunteer to put up a page of warnings about these things. So I volunteered, and I hooked up with Anne, who was also working on creating an anti-scam resource. And we started Writer Beware, which initially was just, that page of warnings. But now it's a huge site, it's a blog, it's a Facebook page. We thought, naively back in 1998 that if we could warn about it enough, we could sort of eradicate the need for it. But, 20 years on, it's more of a need than ever. There are more writers than ever wanting to get published, wanting to start a career, and there are more scammers and rip-off artists and incompetents than ever who want to take advantage of them. So we're still putting out warnings and will be for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, wow. Have you noticed that this has made people less likely to talk and converse with you? Or have you found that it's actually the opposite and more people have come to you and been like, hey, I've got this thing I think that you need to know about? How has backlash been?
Backlash definitely from the people who don't want the truth to come out, but the publishing industry and people around publishing have been super receptive. You know, I get tips and emails all the time from editors, agents, publishers, and also writers, of course. The publishing world, you know, in 1998, the publishing world was like this world of scams. And then there was the world of publishing, because this was before the self-publishing revolution. So the only way to get published really was the traditional publishing route. And, you know, publishing just did not know about this scam universe that was ripping off aspiring writers. But that's no longer true. Writers and publishing professionals are a lot more knowledgeable about this than they used to be. And I, you know, I don't think I am flattering myself when I say that. I think that's partly due to writer beware, but also because of the prevalence of scams, because they're so common. If you are a new writer and you are querying or submitting, you're almost guaranteed to run across at least one dodgy outfit.
Yeah, have any of you come across anything before, you know, you were with your current agent or whatever? Have any of you been involved in something like that?
So what I'll say is that, so Writer Beware is such an amazing resource. I'm always pointing people towards it. Like, if it sounds too good to be true, it's probably too good to be true. But the other thing I would say, and this is what I also, like, this is one of the advantages of having the internet, as opposed to like all the bad things with the internet, is that it gives us the ability to network with other writers. And other writers can also be good resources for, like, have you ever heard of this? And they can say, no, 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 don't touch it. Like, that sounds terrible. Don't ever pay anything to anybody up front. That's crazy, right? And so that's, I also encourage people to kind of find other writers. You can, even with legitimate agents, you can always ask their current clients or their past clients what they're like to work with, just to know that if, you know, if they're the right fit. And, you know, one of the best pieces of publishing advice I ever got was from a friend. This is before I had an agent. She turned to me and she said, be choosy. And I was like, are you kidding me? I was like, I just want somebody to like my stuff. Like, what are you talking about? Be choosy. But she's absolutely right. She's absolutely right, because finding the wrong partner, even if they're legitimate, finding the wrong partner is worse sometimes than just waiting and having the right partner.
Yes, that I tell so many friends that too. They have that initial reaction as well, as, what do you mean? Like, I just want someone to like love my work the way I do. And they're like, I found this person. I'm like, but, you know, especially now, I don't know if any of you have done this. I know Jack has self-published and it's a tad different, but you know, these smaller presses, you can query directly to them. And during Twitter events such as like PitMad and whatnot, you know, smaller publishing houses will actually go, you know, and not ask you, but they'll like your pitch and you query directly to them. And, you know, a lot of people get super excited and they're like, oh, well, I've got this house and it seems fine. And I'm like, that's great. But you can also use this now as an advantage. You can be like, hey, agent, I have this book. It was with this house, like, you know, and they just get so excited and they're like, oh, I don't want an agent. They'll take 15 to 10% of my earnings. And then they come across a book contract, and the book contract is worded so prettily and it sounds so nice. And, you know, if you have never taken a class or anything to really deconstruct a book contract, the nicest sounding book contracts are usually just, you don't get much. And they end up really regretting it years down the line.
Yeah, I get, among the most frequent questions that I get are about contracts and contract terms. And there's a lot of bad contract language out there. And, you know, I also hear from people who say, "Oh, this is a terrible contract. This is terrible." And no, this is not what's terrible. What's terrible is the stuff that you didn't see.
Yeah.
So, you know, if you are offered a contract and you don't have an agent, you absolutely need to seek knowledgeable advice and not assume that, you know, your common sense understanding is enough, because publishing has terms and provisions that you don't find elsewhere, and you really, there can be bad stuff that's sort of hidden in the depths of the fine print, and you need somebody who really knows about it to tell you. You know, there is a lot of information now, great information out there now. There are so many agents who are on social media who are super helpful, and so many agent blogs and publisher blogs. So there are many, many more resources for writers to figure out what's good and what's bad than there used to be. By the same token, the internet is also full of misinformation. So for new writers, you really need to know how to filter. Don't just assume you can go online and learn about publishing, because there is a lot of junk out there.
You're speaking my language. So I have a blog called Twitter Facts or Not Facts, where I take some of the most, you know, the hottest topics that were like the most frequently just infactual myths that I've seen floating on social media, particularly in Twitter. And I would really like, if I know some of you aren't on it as much, but if you've seen it anywhere, if you've heard it, what are some of the worst myths you've come across as far as the publishing industry goes? Anything, as far as anything, you know, trade and self, just any aspect of it, or writing even.
You need to have connections in order to get traditionally published. And as a related thing, publishers and agents won't consider you unless you've already published. Those are both myths.
Wow, I've never heard the latter, because they're so.
I've heard that too.
They're so, you know.
They won't consider you unless you've been published before. The myth.
Yeah. There's all of, you know, everything I've heard is that, you know, they're seeking the debut author. They want the debut author. They want that one novel that's going to really, you know, turn this debut into an evergreen title and an evergreen author. That's funny to hear, like the exact opposite kind of also floating around, which just goes to show that
get published.
It's just.
I know when I was working on my self-published adult novel, I was talking to other authors, and one of them advised me not to self-publish because then, according to this person, I would have a harder time finding an agent and getting traditionally published, because I would be seen as like an indie publisher. And that, you know, turned out not to be the case for me, because it was actually through the Kickstarter campaign that I did for my self-published book that I met my now agent. So I think it's something that, you know, for me, that first book was like a learning experience. I hired my own editor and really sort of went through that process, start to finish, of like drafting and revising and finishing a book. And that was hugely valuable for me. So I think that's something that I've experienced and I've heard a couple times. And I think, yeah, I think it's, you know, it's, everything is like on a case-by-case basis, where I've had friends who, you know, found their agents by submitting queries, like, you know, like sort of the way that, you know, you're expected to. And I've had other friends who, you know, got book deals off of blog posts that they read about, like, coming home with a rejected manuscript and having an agent reach out to them and ask to read the manuscript. And so there are like a lot of different paths to, you know, getting your book published, is all I'm saying. And I don't think that, you know, going down any one of them would preclude you from, you know, changing or pivoting or going down another.
That's a great point.
I agree with what Jack said. I think that was really well said. One of the myths I hear a lot is that you have to have a marketing platform or social media followers and even look at you. And I have to say, the thing that always makes me laugh about that is that if you don't really have anything to market, if you don't have the writing, then, you know, it's really all about the writing. It doesn't matter how many Twitter followers you have or what, if you're, you know, living in a hole and doesn't have never been on social media or don't have an internet connection, like it's really all about the work. So I think, you know, we so lose sight of just actually making the work and making the work really good. And I really think the priority always has to do to create the art, make the work, and then worry the world will have its way with it. And honestly, you don't really have any control over that. I wonder if sometimes our obsession with marketing and social media and everything is that it gives this illusion that you might have some kind of control, like if you have a certain number of followers or platform or something. But I've always found that it's really just about making the best work you can, and then you just have to let it go and just realize you can't really control it after that.
I think that's definitely a good point. I think that is where the myth stems, is exactly what she said, is they think that, you know, if you've got a great, really big platform, even though you've got no content, when you do have content, you'll have all these people racing to get it. And I see that a lot, and people were doing that a lot for like, follow me, I'll follow back to get a bigger platform, thinking they would get more followers and more readers. And it doesn't happen that way if the content doesn't hold up. And, you know, some of the most successful writers and agents and anyone in any field, but, you know, since writing is really prevalent on Twitter, you know, a lot of successful people in publishing don't use or have Twitters very, you know, they don't use them frequently.
You know, as far as platform goes, I have a sizable platform as the writer beware person and a close to zero platform as a writer, and there really is no crossover as I've discovered. So, you know, this whole thing about platform that really is a myth, you know. And publishers, I mean, it doesn't hurt, but publishers really don't care about that.
Rajani, do you have something?
Oh, yeah. One other thing I would say is it's kind of like two sides that are kind of, I don't know how they coexist, but like some people think that all agents are the same, which is definitely not true. And then other people think that like there are some dream agents, and then like you wouldn't want anybody else. And that's also not true. So just like with everything else that you have to do, you should research agents before signing with them, and you should ask people what it's like to work with them. And some agents are excellent agents who sell books, but they don't have the same style as you do. You know, if you don't mind waiting 5 months for your agent to read your next book, hey, that's okay. You know what I mean? That's you. For some people, it might drive them crazy. And then the other idea is that there are certain dream agents. I think that there's, you know, it's dangerous to kind of go down that path, because there are a lot of newer agents that are with excellent agencies and get all kinds of mentorship and have access to publishers and editors who have more space in their schedule that it might be worth checking out, versus somebody who has already really established themselves and have a ton of clients and may not be able to give you the kind of the attention that you want.
Yeah, that's also a great point. It's, you know, dream agents are more than just someone who can sell your novel. It's someone who really gels with you. Yeah, so if anyone has any questions, I think it'd probably be easiest to just write them in the chat, and then any of our participants who has an answer, or, you know, as many of them who have an answer, can just feel free to answer it and go off of that. So if anyone would like to ask anyone specific a question, or the panel as an entire entity something, we will open it up for questions now. If not, we can talk amongst ourselves for a few minutes. Is there anything else that, I guess while people are typing, if they're going to be typing, is there anything that you guys want to touch on that wasn't?
I'd love to hear how everyone's managing to write during the pandemic, and just, I'm finding it, I mean, I've been writing for 20 years and I'm finding this, you know, unlike anything I've ever experienced, just trying to produce work when it feels like constantly being under siege as a, my soul, or just as a human, I'm finding it so challenging. So I would love to hear how everyone's just managing to produce the work in this situation.
I haven't written anything in months. I just, well, there's personal stuff, but it's just so hard to focus and concentrate, and I don't feel I'm having a tough time getting to the writing place.
I'm thinking of my writing as resistance. So I just make myself, I go for time rather than producing a certain amount of stuff, and I write whatever it is I want to write. I have obligations that I need to keep writing. So for when it feels hard, I just work for a certain amount of time. And then at other times I'm like, you know what, I'm just going to write a picture book draft that has like nothing to do with anything, just because I feel like it. But I also feel like this, like making yourself feel joy in the midst of this craziness that we are living in is good. It's like good for us, and it's good for the world.
That's beautiful. Can you write that down? I want to put that on my desk. I think that's really beautiful.
Yes, writing is resistance. Yes,
you're right. I think that's so true. Joy is an act of resistance right now. It's really beautiful. Thank you.
But so like I've also had a really hard time writing, and I used to write so much so fast, and I've had such a hard time writing, and I've had to like teach myself that there are other ways to be creative, and still being creative with writing that's not just writing, as far as like a Pinterest board. It's visually attractive, but it also like helps me think. I'm thinking like, oh, this pin relates to this work in progress is how, or like doing really, really in-depth character sketches or setting sketches. I definitely tend to pants, maybe sometimes plants more than really plot, but you can still, really think about a character's motivation, or, oh, what is their deepest, darkest secret, and kind of just, I don't know, that's stuff that I do to keep myself busy when I find that I want to be really creative and write, and I just can't.
I had to literally go to a cabin in the woods with like no internet connection. My partner and I just got back from a trip to the Smoky Mountains. And previously from that, we knew someone in sort of West Michigan that had like a cabin that they were using half the time. And when we went, I think this was this past summer, it was the first time we had left the house since January, really for like for more than a day. And I think like it just like, I think that one of the troubles with the internet and being so connected is that our minds are always elsewhere on, everything that's happening around us. And I think it helps really to connect with just like what's in your very immediate environment, to kind of like tend to your house or like your garden, and just like concentrate on those everyday things, even though, we all know that all that stuff is out there, but I think like reconnecting with that presence has helped me find my rhythm again.
That's a really great, that's a great idea. Think about like, they always tell you after a big project, kind of decompress and do something. And even if some of us haven't been writing big projects this year, I really see it as being 50-50. Either people are super, super productive, or they're just people who are like, I can't write. And I've definitely fallen into that. Something that would be a good idea, to just kind of like take a breath and go outside and just regroup and, reorient yourself with yourself. Would be a good idea.
So someone has asked a question in the chat about treading lightly on certain topics and being worried about dealing with emotions, and they write YA. So I guess my answer to that would be, so I don't write YA, I write middle grade and picture books, but I think this applies to all writing, is that it's the emotion, like the trueness of the emotion that readers really connect to. And it doesn't have to be exactly something that happened to you, to you personally, but I think conveying true emotion in your writing is the draw, is the pull, is why we care about characters. But there are lots of ways to get to that without kind of drowning in it. So, and I'll just give an example. So my next middle grade novel is a novel in verse, and it is very emotional. It's like deals with some heavy stuff. There's lightness to it too, but I chose to write it in verse precisely because it was so emotional, because there are fewer words that convey more meaning, but you don't have to like sit there with it for a very, very, very long time. And you can read it and you can step away and then you can come back to it. So what I would say is maybe experiment with different types of writing to see if you can connect to those emotions more easily.
One trick I have too is I write a lot. I write YA and adult, and I'm writing more and more personal essays. And I've written a lot about my mom died very suddenly when I was a teen many, many years ago. And it's still very painful to write about, to go back in that space. And one thing I've realized that's really important is, I think when I'm doing my best work, or when any writer is, I think you really have to break yourself open emotionally. There's that famous quote that you're basically like opening a vein and bleeding into your typewriter. So it can feel very painful in ways, but can also feel very cathartic. But when I teach essays and I also teach fiction. And one thing I always love to say is that, I always write by hand in a notebook, and often that's where my best writing comes out. And I think that's because what you put in the notebook doesn't have to be shared with the world. So I think often my best writing is when I'm tricking myself, and this is true for fiction and essays, when I'm really opening that vein and breaking myself open and really revealing stuff, but I'm able to do it by hand because I know this will never be shared. And then usually there's something that comes out that actually can be shared. Even if it's 2 sentences, sometimes it is a whole page or a paragraph. But I think, writing by hand for me is a real way to get to that honest place of feelings. And often the most challenging, something will come out by hand where I'm like, I can never share this with the world. But through the process of revision, it actually is shareable. And that's often the thing that resonates the most with readers.
Yeah, I think to the point that talking about how YA and teens in particular don't like to talk about their feelings. And while that may be true for many of them, I think that though having a story where they can, read someone feeling the same way, they don't have to then verbalize what they're feeling, but they then are connected to this character because they're like, I feel this too. I don't like to talk about it, but they're reading about someone who experiences those same really deep and personal emotions that they do. And even though they may not like to talk about it, they definitely would love to read about somebody who has experienced or is experiencing in a novel the same things that they have.
Just to add on to what Margo was saying, even though I personally, I don't write by hand, and that's like, I find that like when I'm typing on a computer and just have like a blank page in front of me, I can like type at the pace of my thinking. And I just like, when I'm writing longhand, I can tend to get caught up like, with the next thought and the next thought. But I think it has the same effect where I'm articulating those emotions in front of me, and then like going back later on and sort of, I'm like overwriting and then going back later on and then thinking about, okay, now that I know that this is what the character is feeling in this moment, what are other ways that I can express that or communicate that without them actually saying it or outright like thinking it? One exercise that I've seen used a lot in writing classes is to basically write a scene with a character, standing at the edge of a lake, and then like rewrite the same scene with the character, except they're like, someone close to him has just died. And you want to try to do it without actually articulating the emotions, only through the descriptions of the lake. And so I think there are a lot of like techniques and ways to actually, like Margo was saying, to actually express those emotional qualities.
I agree. And one of my favorite things is when is using dialogue, when a character's dialogue is the exact opposite of what they're feeling, but they're giving it away with other things that they're doing, or that their dialogue seems to be saying one thing, but they're really saying something else. And later on, you realize that.
Yeah, lots of different hidden ways to show emotion. So it's almost basically been an hour. So Christine, if you want to, panelists, if you have anything else to add, any last comments? If not, I would like to hand it over to Christine, who's hosting.
That was a fantastic conversation. Thank you all so much. That was terrific. So thank you to all our panelists. Give a little emoji clap here. Really appreciate all the insight that you shared with us today. So thank you. So now we're taking a little bit of a stretch break. So we'll be back in this room for the poetry, publishing opportunities for poetry. And then at 3:45, we'll do the Meet the Agents, and that'll be back in Zoom room 1. I apologize that I mislabeled this as Zoom room 4, but it's actually Zoom room 3. But anyway, so please join us for one of those sessions. And then of course, please join us for happy hour at 5 o'clock, where we can all kind of hang out, get to kind of decompress and hopefully chat with each other, and also meet the winners of our fiction contest. So thank you again to everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.